This week on New Hampshire Crossroads, a special edition, including our neighbors to the west and to the east. From Vermont, Gene Bean, championship pitcher of horseshoes.
You've got to be positive about your shooting. Each shoe has to be positive.
From Maine, Helen Nearing. With her husband, Scott, she built the Good Life Center, an inspiration to alternative lifestyle advocates for generations. And in New Hampshire, a journey to a place time forgot in Wilton.
Being an old system, it needs a helping hand, which I just gave it.
Hi, I'm Fritz Weatherby, and this is New Hampshire Crossroads.
Local presentation of New Hampshire Crossroads on Channel 11 is made possible in part by Shaw's Supermarkets. Keep New Hampshire beautiful. Recycle your aluminum cans at Shaw's, where you're someone special. First NH Banks, serving the financial needs of individuals, corporations, and local governments throughout New Hampshire. By a grant from the Union Leader Corporation, publisher of New Hampshire's statewide newspapers. We're right for New Hampshire. And CityWorks Productions Incorporated, producers of high-impact corporate and commercial programming for over 2 decades.
Today we're at Old Newington Village on Great Bay, one of the oldest communities in New Hampshire. And behind me is the old parsonage, built in 1699. Isn't it beautiful? This is a special edition of New Hampshire Crossroads in which we are featuring not only New Hampshire people, but also our neighbors to the west and to the east. And the first of these is Gene Bean of St. Albans, Vermont. Last year, Gene placed second in the Class A Horseshoe pitching tournament over in Vermont. Now, this is all the more remarkable because Gene only came to horseshoe pitching 5 years ago. She tells us that she and her boyfriend started pitching horseshoes to add spice to their lives.
My gal is red hot, your gal ain't doodly squat. Yeah, my gal is red hot, your gal ain't doodly squat. Well, she ain't got no money, man, she really got a lot. Well, I got a gal, 6 feet 4, sleeps in
The shiny Italian sports car is just the beginning of Gene's after-hours transformation.
Yeah, my gal is red hot.
It's a 45-minute commute to the St. Albans home she shares with her longtime boyfriend, Don Chouanier. And by the time she pulls into the driveway, there's just one thing on this lady's mind.
To become good, you've got to practice. I get pushed quite a bit doing that.
When Gene gets here, I work around the pits and work on the sand, get them all straightened out.
Yeah, I got the percentage book. Ready to keep score.
Sure.
One ringer coming up. Another ringer coming up. It's not just getting up there and throwing a horseshoe. There's something to this game.
Gene and Don soon discovered what that something was and began winning tournaments. Within a couple of years, Gene had taken the Vermont women's title. Don became a consistent Class B competitor, and the two soon found themselves literally up to the rafters in trophies.
Okay, you hold the shoe, say like this, or some hold it like this, and I hold it like this. How do you hold it, Gene?
Well, same way, as long as you feel comfortable with the shoe and it works effectively. The only thing I can say is, go for it.
Well, if you want to live it up and drive a limousine, have plenty of money in your blue jeans, a lot of pretty women hanging on your wing. Pay attention, man, you get just what I mean. You got a dig ball, dig ball, dig ball, dig hoo-wee. A dig ball, dig ball, dig ball, dig ball. You got a dig ball to get ahead in the world.
Dating back to the early post-war years, East Middlebury's Sodbusters Horseshoe Club has long hosted the traditional first competition of the season in northern Vermont, the Mother's Day Tournament. For serious horseshoe pitchers, events like these are the culmination of long, patient hours of backyard practice, a chance to tangle with some of the toughest customers in the game, all of them with an eye on making this year their career best. And then there's the clay. Unlike the majority of sand-filled backyard pits, a regulation pit contains thick, heavy, unforgiving clay. In one of these, where the shoe lands, the shoe stays.
Number more.
Horseshoe pitching starts out with two people, competitively trying to win. So you go ahead and get on your platform and you shoot. To the best of your ability, you try. You really try. I'll match you?
Okay.
Okay. Have a good game. It's not just getting up there on the pad and saying, hey, I'm going to throw a shoe and hope it's going to be a ringer. It's not that easy. I wished it was, but it isn't. What you got to do is get up there and psych yourself totally on that pin. Face that pin. It's not the opponent that you're facing. It's that pin you're facing. 2 dead, 1 point.
In an early match that will see over 60 horseshoes thrown, Jean exchanges points equally with Bud Levitt. She hasn't expected this much competition this soon. The concern begins to wear on her patience. She's throwing too fast.
You shuffled them around.
Finally, a judgment call requiring the help of the referee and a welcome pause in the action.
Oh, my. I don't know if that's on. I can't. Well, Ken, we know we each have a ringer here. We want to know if this is a ringer. And if it's not, which one is the point?
Close calls underscore just how serious these folks are about their sport.
Not a ringer.
It's not a ringer? Okay, which one's the point then?
With the help of a so-called field gauge, judgments are made on the basis of 1/16 of an inch.
This one isn't quite touching.
Okay.
This one is.
Okay.
This shoe's got the point.
That shoe's got the point. Okay, thanks.
This match is as close as they come. The 10-foot women's distance advantage seems to make no difference to Bud Levitt, who finishes with 2 ringers.
I mean, really.
Can Jean respond with her own 2 straight to stay alive? One down, 1 to go.
No. What a game.
That
What
was
a
a good
game, huh? That's all right.
Some take their free time very seriously. For them, playing well is life's sweet revenge for all the things they have to do. And for a precious few like Jean Bean and Don Schwanier, playing well together makes it even sweeter.
We realized when we first met each other that we were very compatible in a lot of ways. And doing the things that we have now done together, it shows, and we purely enjoy it. We both are ecstatic and excited to get into new ventures as long as we do them together. What do you think, honey?
Good news. Jean and Don Schwanier got married this last summer. That segment, by the way, was produced by Vermont Crossroads, a sister program of ours in the Green Mountain State. Over the years, they have broadcast a number of our segments. It's nice to get a look at the work that they do, isn't it? Oh, and by the way, New Hampshire has more registered horseshoe pitchers than any other state in New England, and the acknowledged center for this activity is Keene, New Hampshire. In the first week in June, they will be holding in Keene what they call the Keene Warm-Up. Doesn't time pass quickly? I mean, you go by a street corner, and the next time you go by, you find they've torn down an old building and put up a new one, and another piece of history has passed. But you know, there are places in New Hampshire where things seem hardly to change at all. I have discovered a treasure. A place so full of nostalgia it will break your heart. A place whose history lies strewn about as if work done 100 years ago had suddenly come to a halt and people had gone home leaving everything just as it was. A place that smells of dry lumber and turpentine and leather and machine oil and dust. A place out of a dream.
Barney Google with a googly eye. Barney Google is the luckiest of guys. If he fell into the mud, he'd come up with a diamond stud. Barney Google.
I have discovered the Fry Measure Mill, an eclectic catch-all of dog carts and shingle saws, ice cream freezers and carding combs, firkins, and toothpick makers and victrolas and ancient printing presses, barrels and baskets and boxes, a place where nobody ever threw anything away.
Barney Google had a wife 3 times his size. She's to Barney 44. Now he's living with his horse. Barney Google with a googly eye. Barney Google with a googly eye.
The Fry Measure Mill still runs off direct water power, just as it did in 1850. Owner, Harley Savage.
Right now, in order to activate the power at the mill, we're turning on the turbine, which is downstairs in the bottom of the pond. Being an old system, it needs a helping hand, which I just gave it. And we've simply opened the outside valve of the water wheel so the power can be transferred into the inside of the mill.
And in this old Wilton, New Hampshire mill with its water power and leather belts, it is surprisingly quiet.
It's a very soft, gentle, human kind of sound, as opposed to the high-pitched whine that you find in a lot of machine shops today.
For 135 years, since before the Civil War, this old mill has operated continuously. It is, in fact, the oldest measure mill in America. A measure mill makes measures, shaker boxes, and piggins. Harley's father, Harland, operates machinery that is as old as the mill itself. This contraption is called the elephant's foot.
The elephant's foot is a machine invented by Daniel Cragen in the 1800s to drive the bottoms, help drive the bottoms into the measures. It's once again run by water power.
Measures are sold on the premises in the Fry Mill gift shop. They are sold as is or with a handle. A handle on a measure makes it a piggin. And there is a story here.
Well, a woman from the Canterbury Shaker community came down years back and saw the piggins hanging in the gift shop, retail shop that we had, and looked at me and said, "Harlan, do you know why they call this a piggin?" And figuring a good story was about to come, I said, "No, would you please tell me?" And she said, "Well, in my grandmother's day and her grandmother's day, every household had a piggin in the kitchen. And after a meal or during baking, all the table scraps and baking scraps were put in there. And that's actually the vessel they carried them out to feed the pig in." I don't know if we're rewriting history, but that's the story I tell everyone that comes on the tour.
With the exception of the use of the electric drill, measures and piggins have been made here in this same way for generations. So technically, these are not reproductions. They are originals. But measures are not the only things that the Fry Mill turns out. They make other wood products too, and curry cards for sheep. And look at this, way up in the attic. They have their own ancient letterpress print shop.
He got odds of 10 to 8. Soft Pup came in 3 days late. Barney Google with a googly eye.
The question is, why is it here? All this history, untouched. Well, probably because it's hard to find. You see, to get here, you have to travel on an old country road. And hidden away in the trees, this old mill. A metaphor, a reminder of something gone. A reminder of what our life was a long time ago.
Googly, with the googly eye.
Springtime is probably the perfect time to visit the Fry Measure Mill. All that water over the dam makes such a beautiful sight. And now we have a very special treat for you, a visit with Helen Nearing. This segment was produced by the brand new Maine public broadcasting program, Vantage Point, which is broadcast once a month. Scott and Helen Nearing, you may remember, were among the first of the new American homesteaders. Back in the 1960s, their books influenced an entire generation of young Americans. Scott Nearing died 5 years ago, right after his 100th birthday. But Helen, God bless her, is still very active, as you will see.
Well, up with the birds in between 5 and 6. Make the fires, look at what the weather will be like, decide to be outdoors when it's good weather and indoors when it's bad weather. Do my correspondence and fill book orders. Usually tend to the details like that in the morning. And then I'm out in the garden. I plant, or I harvest, or I weed, or I see people, and go early to bed, not quite with the birds, but when any good music on radio is over. We never had a radio before when Scott was around. He didn't like the noises that issued from it, but I missed the music. So good classical concerts I listened to in the evening.
Scott and Helen spent their lives together working very close to the earth and very far from money.
We don't owe anybody a nickel. We don't borrow any money. We don't pay any interest. And we prefer to pay as we go and wish the bankers would find useful occupations for themselves. And
though she's in her 80s, Helen Nearing grows most of her own food as she and Scott did for so many years together, organically and intensively.
Isn't that pretty? Flowering chard. Got first prize with one twice as big as this at the Blue Hill Fair. That a nice bouquet. People have come and looked at the place and said it looks more or less the way when Scott was here. Not your compost piles. His were very tidy. His were meticulous. Mine are effective, but not as regular and perfect as his was. Look, here's a flower. Still growing. That's pretty perky. Isn't that nice? That flower. And here's next year's compost. Good soil. That's what builds the garden. Seaweed, we put sawdust, we put weeds. No manure. Just what comes in the garden, what comes in the place.
They built their home when she was in her 70s and he in his 90s.
I like building the stone. I like picking up stone, and I have an eye for stone, and we don't cut any stone. I pick them up from the beach or the road or the woods, and I laid every one, and Scott did all the mixing of the concrete in a wheelbarrow, but I wouldn't let anybody else touch a stone. I wanted to have the fun of doing it all myself. So we did it together, all the stonework. It took 3 summers. We did it slowly. We didn't rush at it. We didn't push. We did the outhouse first, and then we did the woodshed and garage, and then we did the house. Then we did the garden wall, and then we did the greenhouse. In all, it took maybe 5 parts of 5 years. But it's there for more than 5 years. It's probably there for 500, I hope.
Back in the early part of the century, Scott became a radical, committed to making a better world for those he saw being oppressed and exploited by the powerful. His views got him fired from his job as professor of economics at the University of Pennsylvania, and he went to the University of Toledo.
They took him on as professor of sociology and economics, and the First World War came along, and Scott became a pacifist, and he believed that the war had a commercial reason for being, and he did not go along with it. and the university couldn't take that. So for being a pacifist and being and talking against the war, he was out of that university, and no college would ever touch him. From then on, he was blackballed.
Helen sees their pacifism and vegetarianism as interconnected paths.
It seems joined together. If you don't want to kill people, you don't want to kill animals. If you don't want to kill animals, so I kill people. And obviously, we both of us have lived long and healthy lives without doctors into our, in his case, into his hundreds, and mine into my 80s. We've not had doctors, and we've not been ill, and we've been able to be strong enough to carry on our work.
Scott and Helen devoted their lives together to being a resource for others to learn that frugality, simplicity, and hard work are the bedrock of the good life. Their homes have been a mecca for alternative lifestyle advocates for years.
People still continue to drop in, even though Scott is not here. I have many visitors during the day, some announced and some unannounced, and I see them as part of my social work. I could live quite happily alone, but I enjoy people too.
When Scott died, Helen was faced with being really alone for the first time in her life.
I don't remember really after he left. I certainly must have missed him, and I missed his physical help around the place, but it's sort of a blank to me for about a half a year. And then I start to remember again. I was glad for him. He'd had a long and a thoroughly interesting life. He'd contributed a great deal. He'd gotten a great deal out of life. And he, as I, was interested in what happens after death. And he went decisively and dedicatedly into that good night. He stopped eating. He was sitting at the table with us here and said, "I think I'll stop eating now." And I agreed, I understood, I complied, and I sped him on his way. He only got juices for a month, and then he went on water for a week, and he just quietly faded away. There was no pain, no doctors, no pills, no medicines. He just decided it was time to go, and go he did. I think that's a respectable, decent way to leave life. I intend to do the same.
What advice does Helen give to people facing a similar situation?
To wish the best for them, and the best may well be to end physical life, but I think there's another life beyond. My parents were interested in Eastern religions, and they had a vast library, and I read all the books that they had in the library. They were members of the Theosophical Society, and I grew up in that idea, in that faith, in a belief that there's something beyond the physical world. People see a ship going across the ocean and disappearing beyond the horizon, and to them the ship is gone. But to others on the other side, they're welcoming the ship. They say, here she comes, here he comes. So I look on death as a leaving the physical plane and going to another plane. When Scott died, over 1,000 letters and cards and telegrams and cables came in for his birthday, 100th birthday, and for his death day. And we even got one from Ronald Reagan, which I think is probably a matter of course to everybody who becomes 100, they get one. But this was from our Harborside mailman amongst the letters. Scott will be remembered as a man who gave forth knowledge, a way of life, and a new line of thinking. When the word is received that nature has called another, we shall listen and pause, then go on our way, knowing full well that there was a man that altered and improved the direction of many. It's a beautiful poem.
Before we left Helen and Scott's place, she painted a self-portrait.
An old lady on the way out, and cheerfully on the way out. I look forward to an ending of a long and worthwhile and an interesting even a pleasant and happy life. I believe in reincarnation. I think I came from somewhere and I'm going somewhere, and that there can be a point and purpose in my life, and I gladly go along with it.
Scott and Helen Nearing's two best-selling books were entitled Living the Good Life and Continuing the Good Life. And this winter, Helen was at the McDowell Colony in Peterborough working on her latest book, which will be entitled Leaving the Good Life. And when will it be published? Well, Helen doesn't know right now, but she says she's gotten the bare bones down and she's going to let it simmer all summer. Well, that's our show for this week. Join us next week when Chip Neal gives us a look at the flip side of trucking. And ballet professional Jacques d'Amboise comes to New Hampshire and gets the kids dancing. Till then, for New Hampshire Crossroads, I'm Fritz Weatherby.
Local presentation of New Hampshire Crossroads on Channel 11 is made possible in part by Shaw's Supermarkets. Keep New Hampshire beautiful. Recycle your aluminum cans at Shaw's, where you're someone special. First NH Banks, serving the financial needs of individuals, corporations, and local governments throughout New Hampshire. By a grant from the Union Leader Corporation, publisher of New Hampshire's statewide newspapers. We're right for New Hampshire. And Cineworks Productions Incorporated, producers of high-impact corporate and commercial programming for over 2 decades.